Forest Pack 7.3 is out now with some great new changes. Here's a quick summary of the main improvements. First up, we now have much more control when scattering on reference markers by being able to match items using their names. Secondly, groups have been completely rewritten to make them easier to randomize. And finally, we can now scatter volumetric effects in VRay, such as these Phoenix fire sims. And VRay also now supports native instancing for lights, which means better optimization plus the ability to randomize the light's tint value using forest color. In this video, we'll give you a quick overview of what's changed, plus some tips on how to get the most from these new features. First up, we have some handy improvements to the reference mode that allows you to match specific objects to reference markers simply based on their names. For example, in this scene, I'm imagining that a surveyor has completed a detailed site survey and has provided a file with several markers, each named according to the type of object. So we have tree species identified using sequential names like Elm 1, Elm 2, Elm 3, etc. We've also got Hornbeam 1, Hornbeam 2 and Hornbeam 3, so two types of species. And for good measure, we're also going to add in some references for the locations of rocks. So here's how, using a single Forest Pack object, we can scatter the correct geometry on each one of those markers. First of all, you'd create a new Forest Pack object in icon mode. Next, you'd go to the distribution rollout and change the mode to reference. Check this new option called Match Geometry by Name. Now, we'll add the reference markers, so click on the Add Multiple button here, and then select all of the reference objects in the scene. Go to the geometry rollout and add a new object. Right click and set it to disabled. Rename it unassigned or something similar. Now this step isn't strictly necessary, but this object's really useful for debugging, since the first item found in the geometry list will be used when none of the other items match the names of the references. So now we'll add the geometry itself, so I'll add a second item. In this case, I'm going to use an elm from the 3D Garden European Trees collection. Now you should recall that the reference markers were called Elm 1, Elm 2, Elm 3, etc. So what we need to do is to give this item a name that's found at the start of those reference objects' names. So really, in this case, naming it Elm is all we need. Press return, and the object is placed on all of the markers that have a matching part of their names. And remember that all of the other unmatched markers will use this first item in the geometry list, which is currently disabled, so they'll remain blank. Great, let's add the other tree species. Once again, I'll load a tree from the library. This time I'm going to rename it Hornbeam to match the names assigned to those other markers. Hit return and the tree is assigned. It's easy. So the nice thing about this approach is that if you want to change a model, all you have to do is select the marker and then rename it. That way you can easily control what models are being used without having to switch to items editor mode. One quick note though, if you do rename a marker, you'll just need to rebuild the forest object for the changes to be visible in the viewport. Rendering will do this automatically, as will moving the marker itself. What happens if you want to randomly select from multiple objects from a marker with a given name? For example, it would be pretty obvious if we just repeated the same rock model again and again. So to illustrate, once again in the same Forest Pack object, I'll open the library browser, and this time I'm going to load several rocks from the collections that ship for free with Forest Pack. And you can do this by holding down Control to select multiple objects. And when you're done, click Load Selected. Once they've been imported, select them all in the geometry list again by holding down Control. And then batch rename them by simply typing in the rename field. And again, you want to be sure that you use a string that appears in the marker's name that you wish to target. So in this case, I'm imaginatively using the name Rock. And that's it. When the same name appears like this multiple times in the geometry list, Forest Pack will randomly select from them. Another particularly handy use for this is when you want to change camera angles. You can easily move a tree by simply animating the position of its marker. We hope this really improves your workflow and opens up new possibilities for using reference markers with Forest Pack. Next up, let's look at how we've updated and improved scattering groups. So in Forest Pack 7.3, the way we handle groups has in fact been completely rewritten. To illustrate, let's step away from this scene for a moment and take a look at a more unusual example of a drone. If I open this group, you can see that in order to get some motion blur, the propellers are animated using X-form modifiers. This means I couldn't attach all the parts into a single object, I'd lose the animation, so instead I group them. Now let's add this group to an existing forest pack object. I'll go to the geometry rollout and click on the plus button to add a new item. It's important to remember to add groups to forest pack, you can't pick them directly from the viewport. Instead, you'll have to press H on the keyboard and open the Object Picker dialog. Then select the group from the list and click Pick. There is an alternative if the group is currently open, as mine is here. You can also select a group by clicking on its selection brackets in the viewport. So this all looks fine so far, but watch what happens if I randomize the rotation and scale. Suddenly the model falls apart with the propellers detached from the body. This is because the old group behavior was intended for patches of plants and would randomize each element of the group individually. In fact, it would also evaluate surface conforms, areas and camera clipping individually too. For collections of plants, this might have been what we'd have wanted, but for models like this drone, that clearly isn't going to be correct. And that's why we've introduced a new option that will process the group as a single object. All you need to do to use it is go to the geometry rollout and enable the Keep Group Hierarchy checkbox. As you can see now, the group's integrity is preserved and it all behaves as a single object. From now on, this is the default way that Forest Pack will handle groups. But of course, if you still need the old behavior, you can simply switch between them using this Keep Group Hierarchy option in the geometry rollout. So now let's head back and apply this to our original scene, but this time we're going to use it as an excuse to illustrate another new feature. We're pleased to say that Forest Pack is now able to scatter VRayVolumeGrids and Phoenix sims. There's nothing to it really, you just pick either of these two objects like you would do lights or other non-geometric objects. In this example, I've grouped the Phoenix sim with a brazier, some firewood and a light source. The light's included since there's a limitation with Phoenix that the auto-generation of firelights isn't supported when sims are instanced. So let's scatter it. Open the items rollout and add a new item. If it's a group that contains geometry and volumetric effects, just enable non-geometric objects first to be sure. Then click this button and press H on the keyboard to open the object picker. Select a group and that's it. We're now scattering a group of objects that contains geometry, lights and a volumetric effect. Best of all, if we want to randomize the transforms, we can now comfortably do so without the groups being negatively changed thanks to the new Keep Group Hierarchy option. Talking of lights, if you're a VRay user, then we're pleased to say that Forest Pack now supports these using version 5.2's native light scattering abilities. On the surface, you probably won't notice much difference. But in the past, we'd used a workaround to get around the fact that light instancing at render time wasn't supported in VRay. Happily, since VRay 5.2, this cheat is no longer needed, meaning improved efficiency and more optimized renders. Another, more visible difference though, is that this change means you can now use forest color to randomize the properties of your lights. To illustrate this, let's randomize the colors of these festoon lights. So you see I have some festoon lights in the scene that are currently all the same color. As in our previous examples, these are a group containing geometry and light objects. To randomize the light's color, I'll pick it from the scene, using light lister in this case, and go to its general rollout. Next I'll click on the texture map option and assign a forest color map. Next I'll instance the map to the material editor so we can change it. And then to enable random color, just check the boxes and choose a color. By enabling these swatches, we can randomize between up to 10 colors. If you want more, you can always use Forest Color's Tint from Map feature, or you can even use its Tint by Surface features. We'll keep it simple for now and just use these color inputs. And that's it, hit render and the color of your lights will be randomized. If you prefer, you can also use the VRay multi-subtext map for this same technique. We hope you find these changes to Forest Pack useful, and remember to subscribe and stay tuned for more tutorials coming soon.